Hi, does anyone love playing games? I bet you are. Who doesn't love games these days? They are fun and entertaining. But are all games entertaining? What about educational games? Well, an educational game is still basically a game designed specifically for educational purposes. So the goal of the game is to learn something. And guess what? I've designed one. This is an adventure game designed to help learners with an English level of A1 to A2 to learn more about modals, the words like must, can, should, and will. Through this game, you will learn how to use modal in the sample sentences through an interactive story. The link to the game isn't in the description box, so check that out. This game is also called a learning object, which is an interactive web-based tool that supports the learning of specific concept by enhancing, amplifying, and or guiding the cognitive process of learners, stated by Kay and Nack in 2009. This learning object is developed under the principle of ADDIE, which stands for Analysis, Design, Development, Implementation, and Evaluation. The analysis is the process of identifying the problem that the developer wants to solve by using learning object. Once the problem is identified, the developer arranges the learning objective, the resources to be used, the presentation design, and any kind of needed resources. Then the development process begins. The steps include constructing the prepared materials and resources to be one single product. To ensure the product is usable, the product needs to be used and tested, which lay under the implementation process. The testing steps can be done in multiple testing stages. Then, every testing result is evaluated to see what works and what does not. This cycle continues until the developer feels that the learning object can be launched into a real field. There are two main reasons for the rationale of the learning object. Number one, grammar. Grammar is a crucial part of the language learning as it functions as the foundation to communicate properly in English or any kind of languages. One example is through Modal, which is the material about model is available in the curriculum for junior high school students. However, during the school experience program, the developer found that the students of junior high school do not yet comprehend the concept of model. Students are sometimes confused with the meaning and the usage of each modal, namely can, should, will, and must. Even though they know the literal translation for each modal in Indonesian, but they do not know how to use it in sentences. Number two, the teaching method to teach grammar is not meaningful and interesting. Some of the teachers in that school used the grammar translation method to teach topic about model. Hence, the students were not engaged, which resulted in them not being interested in learning. Therefore, this learning object is developed to fill the gap, to teach grammar, which is about model, in an interesting and interactive way for junior high school students with an English level about A1 to A2. So, this is how the learning object works. The learning object consists of three parts. Number one, the exposure. The learning object provides a real life example of model utilization in the form of conversation so that the students can be more familiar with and immersed in the usage of model in the sentences. The learning object employs various types of model in the sentence contextually. The students can face a question that requires them to choose one of the two available options. However, there is no wrong answer in either option because the focus is to introduce and familiarize the students with various usage of modal in the sentence, including in positive, negative, and question sentences. Number two, the practice. After the story completes, there will be some questions reviewing the story by integrating model into it. This part is aimed to stimulate the students to think and review the use of model in the story. Number three, the concept. Lastly, an explanation about each form of the model is provided at the end of the game so that the students may visit and review the models after completing the game. The explanation page consists of different type of model, example of each type, and some sentence rule for specific models. This reviewing exercise would be so beneficial to strengthen the students' understanding about model. The developer applied the inductive learning principle, in which the example of the concept comes first by giving many practices and exposure to the learners. Through this learning object, it is expected that the students are able to spot, identify, familiarize themselves, and analyze the models in the sentence, especially in daily conversation. After the developer designed the learning object, the developer applied alpha testing in which many experts from different expertise tried the learning object and gave a review. Here are some of the reviews. From the media expert, she said that the visual, the storyline, and the background sounds are very engaging. The feedback for the wrong and correct answer are also clear. The movement of the game is smooth and easy to navigate. However, she mentioned some of the development that I can use is to add more expression to the character to make it look alive. Number two, from the subject matter expert. He mentioned that he is impressed with the learning object, the dialogue system, and how the learning object is able to respond to the text input from the medium. The subject of the model presented the medium is also great because it includes the example and explanation, which is quite helpful for the learners. As for the suggestion, he mentioned that this learning object should be used with the presence of teachers instead of using it independently. Last but not least, from the potential client, she mentioned that the learning object is a great way because the game can be played smoothly, the instructions is understandable, and the player can interact with the quizzes easily. And for this suggestion, she mentioned that I should add more questions to keep the instruction and the procedure comprehensive. Moving on, let's move to the LORI, which stands for Learning Object Review Instrument. This is the graph for the LORI survey that already be spread for the reviews. From the graph, we can see that the learning object result in 4.7 score for its content quality, criteria, learning goals, and feedback. It scores 4.3 in the motivation, presentation, accessibility, and standard comment. Moreover, in terms of its interactions usability, it scores the highest, which is 5 on average. From this result, it can be concluded that the learning object has sufficient time and space for user to interact with the model. Meanwhile, the content quality, the learning goals, and the feedback, even though it's not overall good, should be improved even more. On contrast, the learning object has not yet successfully engaged the learners to stay motivated. It has average presentation design, and accessibility for the user. It is expected that the learning module to be further revised and developed so that it has exquisite design or visual and efficient usability. And here are the some suggestions that made by the reviewers. Number one is to add more expression to the character to make it more alive, which targeting the visual part of the game. And I personally disagree with this because I think that there are already enough expressions in the learning object, which are happy, sad, and annoyed. And also, the storyline also only requires the three facial expressions. With those three expressions, the message can be transferred clearly. So I don't think we need more additional expressions in the learning model, in the learning object. Number two, there's a suggestion that say the module cannot work alone. Hence, it needs the teacher's presence, which I definitely agree. Because as I already mentioned in the beginning of the video, the learning object is only a learning tool developed with the aim to assist the teacher to deliver the lessons about grammar in a more interesting way and engaging way. So definitely it is an assisting learning tool and not serve as an independent learning tool. However, for more advanced learner, this kind of learning tool can be used in an independent way. But for more beginner learner, the presence of the teacher is still needed. Hence, the guard and supervision from the teacher still needed in the classroom. Suggestion number three is to add more questions. I would agree with this because in the game, I only put 3 to 4 questions in the practice sessions. And I believe that by adding more questions, especially by integrating them in the exposure part, will be beneficial for the player. That's why in the future development, I will add more questions if necessary. Last but not least, to make more instructions comprehensive. I already addressed this in my module. I already designed the instructions to be simple and concise sentences, which use no more than 2 sentences in each instructions. So, according to the developer, which is me, the instructions is already clear and comprehensive. That's why this suggestion is already addressed. This learning object is targeting for junior high school students because in the curriculum there is material about model. However, this learning object can also be used for any learners outside of junior high school level with an English level of A2. A2 learners are able to understand a simple and familiar text which is used in a daily basis. That's why the dialogue in the learning object is designed to be simple, which is to meet the needs of A2 learners. And for the implementation, the learning object is implemented in an online setting in which the students play the game on their own with the instructions of the teacher. This step was taken because the developer find a difficulty to directly ask the participant to play the game in an offline setting due to the holiday season. Hence the implementation in online. And of course, the participants already have submitted their consent letter. And this is how the participant used the learning object. Number one, the developer spread the link of the Scratch learning object to the junior high school students and also to the relative with an English level of A2, along with the instructions to use the learning object. And then the participant played the game individually without the direct supervision of the teacher. The participant then recorded the session in playing the game and sent it to the developer. And there's also a note that among five participants, four submitted their responses and one refused to give their responses after playing the game. Okay, so let's see one of the documentations of the participants who played the game. LOAS, or Learning Object Evaluation Survey, is a survey used to measure the impact, effectiveness, and the usefulness of the learning object. The learning object itself, as I already mentioned in the beginning of the video, is an interactive web-based tool that supports this learning of a specific concept by enhancing, amplifying, and guiding the cognitive processes, which is proposed by Kay and Nack in 2009. Furthermore, Kay and Nack in 2009 also mentioned that it is beyond the scope of this paper to compare specific types of learning object use. Hence, it is reasonable to assume that the LOES or this survey is a credible way to evaluate the wide range of learning objects. That's why we use LOES. And in terms of its validity, the internal reliability estimates around 0.78 to 0.89 for the learning object construct in the LOS. And it is considered as good enough according to Klein in 1999, Nunnally in 1978. And in terms of also its validity, uh, there are only two of the 25 studies reviewed for this paper which is mentioned in K and Nack in 2007A and Nurmi and Jacola in 2006A. There are four types of validity that is considered in the paper, namely phase validity, construct validity, convergent validity, and predictive validity. LOAS measure three aspects to evaluate the learning tools. They are learning aspect, quality aspect, and also engagement aspect. Here's the result of each aspect. Number one, the learning aspect. The average of the learning aspect, judging from whether or not the learning object helps the player to understand more about models, result in a high value, which is 4.75 and 4.50 respectively. It indicates that the learning object can assist the learners to understand more about models. Meanwhile, in terms of the quality aspects, the learning object result in values of 4.5, 3.75, and 4.75 respectively. These quality aspects measure the features available in the learning object, the structure and organization, and the usability of the learning object. With the result presented, it can be concluded that most of the learning object with their available features and presentation can help learners understand topic about model even more. Last but not least, In terms of the engagement aspect, the learning object resulted in 4.75, 4.50, and 4.25 respectively. It can be mentioned that the theme, the presentation, and the features have motivated the learners to engage in the learning object. The participants also gave some suggestions and review of the learning object. Some of the interesting aspects of the learning object includes visual or animation, the storyline, the theme of the adventure, and the simple yet meaningful practice sessions at the end of the learning object. In contrast, some of the suggestions given includes the improvement of the sounds or audio, the instructions and variation of the answers, and the longer duration of the game. That's why, as the developer, I already take these notes, which will be used to improve the next learning object that I will be developing. So thank you for the review. And as I mentioned previously, this learning object cannot be used independently. Supervision and direction from the teacher should accompany the learning object. That's why I present the sample lesson plan that can be used in integrating the learning object. This is a 45 minutes time too, which is 90 minutes lesson designed for junior high school students with at least A2 level of English proficiency. There are four objectives that we are going to achieve by utilizing this sample lesson. So, for the objective, after finishing the session, the learners are able to number one, list several examples of model in the story. Number two, analyze the usage of each model according to the context of the story. Number three, to use the model to create the sentences. And number four, to write a story. And the model that we will be using only consists of four models, which are can, will, should, and must. And how do I know that the objective already achieved or not? We are going to use assessment. So the assessment would be consists of formative and summative assessment. The formative assessment will be conducted throughout the session to see whether the students have improved, have understand the learning, the concept of model throughout the learning. While for the summative assessment, it is conducted through writing a mini story, which consists of 100 to 150 words of their writing explaining their story with the theme that is already decided by the teacher. Below is the visualization of the activity. Number one, the teacher asks the students to use the learning object to interact and familiarize themselves with the concept of model through the Ellie story. Number two, the teacher will put three categories onto the board, namely ability, suggestion, and certainty. And then the teacher asks the students to draw back what Ellie said according to the video that is in correspond with this category. So what did Ellie say in terms of the ability? For example, in category number one, ability, what was Ellie capable of? So some of the students might come up with the answers like Ellie can fly because she's the fairy, or Ellie can heal because she has the magic, something like that. And then, with the help of the teacher, they will identify the model can, and then the students will match this model can to the corresponding category, which is ability, by using flashcard. And obviously, each students can also have their own flashcard, or maybe they can use sticky notes, depend on the resources that the students have. I personally love to use sticky notes because it is much easier, but any kind of resources I'll welcome. And for this pre-lesson activity, it can be done in the first 10 to 15 minutes according to the it can depend on the classroom time. And then having some background knowledge about the models, the teacher then asks the students to go back to the learning object and answer the questions that is presented in the learning object. Then, for the WISE lesson, the students gather in a group of 3 to 4 to do a group discussion. Each student should have at least two answers to each question presented, and so they will have a total of six answers, but it can be accustomed to the need of the classroom. Is if six answer is too much difficult, maybe we can reduce it to one answer for each student. It depends on the classroom environment and also the student's ability. So the guiding questions are: number one, what can the students do to help Ellie pass the cave without being hurt by the bat? Number two, what should you do if you were lost in the jungle and don't know the way out? And number three, what will you do if you are the fairy? something like that. So obviously, these are the hypothetical questions, which mean that they have to come up with their own answer as creative as possible. And also, if you notice, there's a words like can, should, and will in the questions. And these words function as the guiding questions, as the guiding words, so that the students can use these words in their writings. So they can come up with the statements like, to answer question number one, what can you do to help Ellie? They can come up with the statements like, oh, I can bring lights because bats hate lights, for example. I can bring knife maybe to fight the bats, something like that. So it's very, there's no right or wrong answer. The only thing to decide whether the answer is correct is their formula or their rules of writing their answers. And to do this, we can refer to the concept uh, in the learning object. Remember, the learning object consists of three parts: the exposure, the practice, and also the concept. By referring to the concept in the learning object, the teacher can guide the students to write each statement of their answer correctly. So, yeah, we can use this learning object in this way. Next step, they can create a story based on their answer in the guiding questions. So in here, the teacher provides the theme like ability, or capability, suggestion, and certainty. So basically, in the ability part, I already provided the guiding questions, which is if you were the fairy yourself, what are the capability that you want? And in terms of the suggestions, if you were the best friends of the fairy, what would you do, or what would you suggest the fairy or Ellie to do to deliver the packages faster? And all of these guiding questions is basically based on the story itself that is presented in the learning object. So if you are wondering about the story, go on and check the learning object to know more about the story. So yep, basically the students have to write 100 to 150 words, mini paragraph or mini story according to this theme. They can only choose one theme that they want. But obviously, if I were the teacher, I would just go on and ask the students to come up with their own theme or their own storyline, like the plot twist, however they like. As long as in the story they incorporated the words like can, will, should, and must. So I just want to like practice their independence more. And for the past lesson, if you have enough time, don't be shy and just let the students share their writings in front of the classroom. I personally love to do that because that's a great way to practice other soft skills like storytelling skill, confidence skill, public speaking skills, and etc. But that's optional, that's not mandatory if you have time and you like it, so go on and do that. For more detail about this sample lesson, I already put the lesson plan document in the description box below, so go ahead and check that out. Last but not least, I'm an educator and I believe that learning does not always happen in the classroom. Outside environments such as playing game, both online and offline, also contribute to the learning even more. This phenomena is part of the incidental learning, which is learning that happens without realizing it. And incidental learning is highly crucial for learners, especially in language learning, as it speeds up the language learning process, because mostly language is acquired, not learned. Just like you can learn or you can speak Indonesia because from your since you were born, you already surrounded by people who speak Indonesia. So that's why you can acquire Indonesian languages. Similar concept also apply to other languages. So that's why outside classroom environment is highly important. Again, if you're interested in playing the game, I leave the link in the description box below, and don't forget to leave any comment and feedback as much as possible. So, yep, thank you for watching this video, and adios amigos.